Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the film The Book of Clarence. Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for The Book of Clarence.
Struggling to find a better life, Clarence is captivated by the power of the rising Messiah and soon risks everything to carve a path to divine existence.
As you do, of course.
As you do, yeah.
Right.
Totally normal. Who hasn't done that?
Right? That seems like the best option. All right. Let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for The Book of Clarence. Sarah, what was yours?
Mine is, it's hard to become an apostle.
Yes. It's hard to become the 13th one.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a tough job, but somebody's got to try.
It is. Yeah. We've seen some valiant attempts throughout this movie. My one-sentence summary is, honey wine may come and go out of style, but oppression looks the same.
Yes. Oh, so good.
All right. Well, let's start off with our initial thoughts of the Book of Clarence. We'll keep our thoughts at a high level in this first section, and then we'll dive in fully into this movie in the second half. So, Sarah, I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts about the Book of Clarence. Did this work for you?
Yeah, it totally did. I had a great time with this movie. I think that it's absolutely hilarious in like the first section, and the way that this is structured is also pretty fascinating to me, because it starts out as this like really like lighthearted romp, and it's just utterly ridiculous, and then over the course of the movie things start to turn a bit, and there's a giant tonal shift, and you end up at the end of the movie just being like, oh my gosh, what did I watch? And I think it's so interesting how it's structured, and how the film uses humor to just like pull you in and then basically sucker punch you by the end of the movie. And it does it so well. And there's so much, I think, in this movie to think about, to consider. For me, like it helped me to kind of see stories that I know well, maybe from a different light. And I thought that was really interesting too. It has a lot to say around, as you mentioned, oppression. There's some police brutality in there, empire, all of that good stuff. But then there's also thoughts about, religion, and what does it mean to be a person of faith, and how does belief influence our actions, and all of that. So there's just a lot of meat to this, in addition to being a really wild, fun ride.
Which is just so impressive to do, especially with subject matter like this. Like this could have easily been just a total just derailment and really insensitive. But I think it's just such a testament to James Samuel and his emotional intelligence, the sensitivity he has to so many big topics, and to do things in an incredibly insightful way, but also very strategic. There's so much that's unexpected about this movie. Like you mentioned, that tonal shift, I think, is one that I didn't see coming, because we start off with such lighthearted, fun content, and it's really funny. And by the end of the movie, we're like, are we doing this? Are we really going there? Oh, we're going there. No, we're doing this. And I think it actually lands that plane really well because of that contrast and that shift that happens. There's so many fascinating and really insightful parallels that I think this movie is making between the biblical story and some of the power dynamics and relational dynamics of that, and like you mentioned, stories that may be familiar to some of us, and then the parallels to things that are so present and top of mind now in our society and in America. It's so insightful, and his ability to do that while also getting you to laugh is very wildly impressive. I was thinking a lot about Jojo Rabbit after this movie ended, because I think that Taika and James Samuel have that same uh, just emotional sensitivity to know how to tackle something that's really meaty and really charged, and topics that are so uh, emotional for so many people, and to kind of look at it from a totally different lens and to make it funny, but not too much so to the point where it feels like it's insensitive. That's a really hard task, and that can end really badly. And for it to not, I think is just such a triumph. So that, man, there's so much in this movie to think about and ponder. And yeah, I'm excited to dive into it because there's a lot here.
And I'm also just impressed by James Samuel and the decisions that he's making and the types of movies that he's making, cuz we reviewed The Harder They Fall a couple of years ago when that came out. And
It's so
so that is
good.
a so good. Such a
Oh,
great movie. And a different take on the Western, which is one of the biggest genres that you can get. And now
yeah.
here we have his take on a biblical narrative. You know, it's a period piece. Again, like this very famous and like well trodden genre of movie. And in both of these, he's been able to put such a spin on it, and also connect it to things that we are dealing with today, like you said. So I'm just appreciating his ability to take a tried and true genre and do something unique and interesting and different with it, and use that vehicle to make us think about things about our world today. I think that's really insightful, and I can't wait to see what he does next. Like,
Yeah.
what is your next type of genre that you're going to break into and use to, I don't know, blow our minds a little bit?
And I think what's also like what was quite impressive to me is James Samuel knows his movie history. Like there's so many
Mhm.
themes and filmmaking choices around the cinematography and the set design and whatnot that are so resonant to that like golden era Hollywood in the 50s and 60s, with movies like Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments, that are have these like sweeping vistas and these large sets, and kind of go big on the production side. And there's so much like thematically, even in those the title cards that kind of break up the three
Mhm.
acts of this movie are so resonant
Yeah.
from old Hollywood. Like he's done his research, he knows his stuff, and so that he knows deeply this genre, he can then reimagine it in a way that feels simultaneously kind of straddling between um, those beloved pieces from the past, but also bringing this fresh, modern take on it. And that is when you know that you've got an artist that really is grounded, but also has a lot of fresh ideas to bring. That is thrilling. That's exciting because there's other versions of like innovators that just kind of totally reject the things of the past and the roots of a genre like this that is so established and so tried and true, and to totally reimagine it is so thrilling.
Mhm. Ugh, it's great. Like, yeah, I think especially for a movie fan who has watched those other movies, like this just helps. It's honoring of those movies and what's already been done, but it's also bringing this like fresh perspective of it and updating it to our times. And it's fascinating how he was able to balance that while also introducing all of these really rich and important themes and these complex characters that we get to watch. Like, there's so much going on in this movie, and if you're a movie fan, there's so much to appreciate with this.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm excited to talk about some of those filmmaking choices that he employs in this, because we talked about this on our episode reviewing The Harder They Fall, but it's fascinating to see the way that his musicality is brought to this visual storytelling medium, and marrying that with so much of the choices made in the score, like all of it's working together really, really well. That chariot race in the opening scene, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is like such a perfect example of the way that he is playing to so many of his superpowers that he's had from his other backgrounds, and bringing them to this artistic medium. Like you can see it and feel it so palpably, and that's thrilling and exciting.
Yeah, yeah, there's a particular fight scene that made me think of The Harder They Fall, because it's this perfect marriage of the score, the cinematography, and the fight choreography, and they're all working together, and it helps just make everything all the more exciting, all the more tense. And that's one of those scenes where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I'm watching this in a theater and not on my couch at home.
Yes, yes. So good. Yeah. And there's so, like, I mean, the movie's littered with scenes like that where even in a conversation with lines of dialogue, the music is so aligned to thematically what's happening, and then also is supporting a lot of the comedic bits as well. So I'm excited to talk about that a little bit more. All right, well, let's include a spoiler alert here. If you haven't seen the Book of Clarence, we recommend checking it out. It's out in theaters. Please go watch this movie before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. All right, where shall we go first? I mean, we're on the topic of kind of his filmmaking style and all that. Let's talk about some of those scenes that really stood out to us before we get to some of the thematic parts of this movie. Tell me about that fight sequence.
Oh, I loved it when he is fighting Barabbas to try and free, I guess, him, not all the slaves. There were there was just so many moments that I was reminded of that final fight scene in The Harder They Fall. Uh, and there's so many similarities between the two. And I think there's a lot of movies that uh the score is really good and helps you emote and helps you better connect to a film, but I feel like James Samuel takes it to a whole nother level because he's also doing the music for this as well. And so you can just see how all of these pieces connect together, and how he's not only this really great and insightful musician, but he understands how music and movement blend together to help make a scene even more electric, even more exciting. So that fight scene between Clarence and Barabbas, I think, really captured that for me.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And I think um in general, like he James Samuel seems to understand that the absence of emotion, the absence of sound, the absence of visual creates opportunity for those explosive moments to really feel big. I think the problem we get in a lot of these like action movies today is that it's so one tone and it's just barreling right at you for like 10 minutes of like punch after punch after punch, or big explosive fight sequences that are just they keep going at that same volume, or they start really loud and they get just somehow louder. And uh, James Samuel understands that musically, it's that contrast, that differentiation that creates that feeling of bigness when we are trying to hit a big explosive moment. And that chariot race scene was also a perfect example of that. Like we know how to ebb and flow, and we know how to go big in the moments that need to, and then bring us back down, and bring the volume both visually and musically and audibly down, so that when that next big hit comes, it feels big and explosive. And I just thought that like that was so well established in this movie. And I think if you like zoom out even more, just thematically, he seems to understand that as well. We're going to lay the foundations for this to seem like a fun, lighthearted romp, but it's that contrast with the ending that really then gives you that sucker punch right in your gut, right in your heart, that actually lands that even better than it would have if it just kind of, we were primed for it from the beginning. So, yeah, man, I mean, watching that opening chariot sequence, I was like, this is how we do great action. Like just the creativity and the shots as well, I thought was so good. There's like a close-up shot of just sand getting blown up into the air from the chariot passing by, and like little things like that just feel so fresh. We've seen a million races through a city in action movies from all of our favorite franchise IPs and new new content as well. And to see a good race through a city sequence, that was exciting.
And I think one of the reasons why that works so well is because you actually feel like you're there. And not in like a like cheesy gimmicky way, but it's in those little things of like you get to see the larger landscape behind, you get a shot of the sand, you get to see like how close the chariots get together. So it's all of these things that we've seen before, but somehow they are uh, just cut together and intermixed with the score and the dialogue, and you feel like you are in that chariot with Clarence seeing what's going on. And so just his ability to make this film that immersive is really impressive. And I think in order to do that, all of the technical components need to be working together perfectly to really make you feel immersed, and I think the Book of Clarence really achieves that.
Yeah, yeah. It's challenging to do, and I think that because the movie starts off with that too, it kind of sets the tone for like we're in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing, and there's like a beginning of a trust to give yourself over to the movie when you experience that right off the bat, which is really really great. It also allows for setting that initial tone for book one of like who this person is. Like we meet this character when he's in the middle of like this big thing that he's trying to accomplish and make some money on, and it fails. Like what a way to get introduced to these two kind of protagonist characters from the beginning as well, like right in the thick of one of their little schemes and operations that goes awry.
And again, it's that understanding of story, it's understanding of audiences that we don't need all of this exposition. Like you can just drop us into the middle of the action and we will learn everything we need to know about the characters in the midst of that action sequence. You know, like we don't need to know, okay, this is Clarence and this is how he ended up in this spot and here's 10 minutes of explanation. No, that's boring. Just plop us in. We will catch up and have a blast doing it. So I think to your point earlier, like James Samuel just understands story and he understands how to structure a great story to get us hooked, to pique our curiosity so that we are willing to go on this really dramatic ride with this character. And I also love that it's this like really explosive introduction to Clarence, so that we get to see what he's like under pressure, what he's like under stress, and the results of his bad decisions, too, all wrapped up in this chariot chase. And so I thought that that was just such an efficient way to introduce us to this character, and a way to spark some questions in us early on so that we're willing to continue watching to maybe get some of those questions answered.
Yep. And the other thing that it does is checks that box of man, James Samuel knows this movie history because like so many of
Mm-hmm.
those
Yep.
movies that chariot race scene is resonant from were about spectacle and being big and dramatic, and people, you know, went to the movies to see something that was dramatic and thrilling and adrenaline inducing, because it was the magic of the movies. And so to start off with that as well, I think was also really quite smart, as far as um, grounding us in this genre, this beloved genre from the past, but doing it in a very different way. The journey we go on is very different from those other movies.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And I love how this movie uses fun and humor, instead of just being, you know, your traditional button down biblical epic drama. You know, our entry point into the story is action and humor and fun, and then along the way, after we've gotten to know these characters, after, you know, they've endeared themselves to us, then we start to see the more dramatic elements of this really start to come up, and by that point we're invested and we are emotionally able to go on that journey. Whereas I think if this had been more traditional and a little bit more like straight laced, then it wouldn't have had the emotional punch at the end. It still would have been, you know, weighty, but I think using humor was such a smart way to get us invested and connected in Clarence and his story.
No, it's so true. Yeah, it's disarming in the best way, because like you mentioned, because this genre specifically, like the biblical story that is incredibly like grounded and dramatic and all of those things and big in a lot of ways, that we go in with so many preconceived notions about what the story is supposed to be and what it looks like, and I think a lot of the biblical story is familiar to much of us in the US. And so the humor really is disarming. It really like forces us to like expand out beyond the closeness that we have to this genre and really be willing to open up our minds to so many of these other connections that he slowly begins to show us and reveal to us. So many of the connections to themes and issues that are important for us in America today. And I think only if we're able to kind of like break out of those boundaries that we've subconsciously set for ourselves for these genres and these types of movies, only then can we kind of begin to let our minds wander to those places that he invites us into, which is so good. Let's talk about some of those. What were some of those themes and connections beyond this kind of this micro story and the macro level that really stood out to you?
Well, so I'm gonna like half answer your question. One of the things that I really appreciate about this movie is how it's really made me think about some things and reconsider just the bent of some of the things that I've been taught, so like spending a lot of time in church. I know the story of Jesus, I know the story of the crucifixion, and the way that I remember it being taught was that uh Barabbas was this really, really bad guy. The Bible says that he was an insurrectionist and a murderer. But I remember it being like really emphasized when it was taught, like this evil dude was released. I mean, a pastor wouldn't say dude, but like this evil man was released so that the perfect son of God would then go to die. Like it was like really, really emphasized how bad Barabbas was.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be the case. I don't know. We will never know because the Bible doesn't say, it just says insurrectionist and a murderer. Um, but this movie shows a Barabbas that I'm like, you know what? I'm I'm kind of with him. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's fighting against the empire. He's standing up for his people. Is he using the best means available? I don't know, but it's the best that he has available to him. And he is trying to protect, he's trying to take care of his people and fight against the empire. And that's not a bad thing in my book. So it's just interesting to watch this movie and have this character presented so prominently in a way that I never imagined him to be. And like the Book of Clarence isn't trying to be, biblically accurate, but I love that Barabbas was included in this and he was highlighted so prominently because I don't know, it just I think it's healthy to like re-examine our beliefs and re-examine the things that we've always been told, and this movie really helped me to think about this this biblical character in a different light than I ever had before. And it's also making me think about, the ways that certain parts of like the white church have I don't know, been more aligned with empire and those kind of teachings. And that just kind of ties into all of this. So I think this is just a really interesting movie to just take and think about and let your mind kind of wander and see if there's any other things that we've been taught or that we've come to believe that maybe isn't as healthy or maybe isn't being informed by the best things, and just I don't know, re-examine some things. So I didn't think that the Book of Clarence was going to be like this really deep thoughtful exploration, but it led me down some interesting roads.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's along that same vein, I think in general the positioning of this story is inviting us to challenge or re-examine some of the established, well entrenched, established ways that we've thought about these stories, and then also to bring that kind of connection point. But one of the areas that I think is the source of many comedic moments in this movie, but I thought was really insightful was around just the whitewashing that we do of
Mm-hmm.
narrative. And, this is a theme that clearly James Samuel was captivated by with The Harder They Fall as well, around the whitewashing of the Western genre and the way it's been portrayed in media, and who cowboys were versus how we've positioned them to look like, feel like. And it's, at this point in America, such a grounded part of the way that we view like masculinity and how we've shaped that idea of manhood in the U.S. just from media. And in a lot of the same ways, the Book of Clarence invites us into that same questioning and re-examining of the whitewashing we've done of the story of who Jesus was. And there's that whole bit with Benedict Cumberbatch, which I thought was just so great. And even in one of the most like deeply emotional moments of this movie around the crucifixion, there's still that little sprinkling of flavor and comedy around someone painting Benedict Cumberbatch
Yeah.
as white Jesus, which I thought was just like perfectly timed. Like it was a really heavy emotional moment, and it can quickly kind of bring us out of that in the ways that we need to, so that we don't get stuck and kind of wallowing in that feeling and that emotion. But the whitewashing of the narrative is so much a part of this movie. There's a version of a one sentence summary that I had around James Samuel does what Bridgerton was trying to do, but like 10 times better. But it's basically like when we put people of color in these roles that we've traditionally thought to be white, because that's the story and visuals that we've been given for so many, many, many decades, it invites us to really think about like who was Jesus, and the likelihood that he was a blue-eyed, white, pale white man
Yeah.
really isn't likely to be the case. So I loved the way that this movie was able to do that with so many of the characters, not just Jesus, but so many of the other important characters from the biblical narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. I don't know. In some ways this almost felt to me like a celebration of like black faith traditions, and just that acknowledgement that I don't know, Christianity and faith is not all about white people. And I don't know, that shouldn't be some like controversial thing, but in some circles it is. And I think that honestly, I think like white people in particular should go see this movie. I think white people of like a Christian background should definitely go see this movie and just I don't know, be challenged by it and allow the humor to disarm and be able to re-examine some of these things cuz like you said, Jesus wasn't white. So I don't think we should continue to try and like center white Jesus. And then once we like extricate ourselves from white Jesus, it's like, okay, maybe there's some other things that we need to separate ourselves from too, like empire. And there's some stuff in here about like police brutality and oppression and things like that that definitely need to be grappled with. And I think using a biblical epic to explore those themes is really, really smart, especially because the Bible and Christianity has been weaponized against people of color, specifically Black people, for centuries. So this movie is doing so much to reclaim the story, put it in a different light, and also highlight like faith and beliefs tie-ins to all of these oppressive systems that have been set up, all while making you laugh and then cry at the end.
Yeah, yeah. And it's such an examination of the state of America today, but also kind of our roots. There's that really great scene where Pontius Pilate, I think, says is basically jabbing at something along the lines of like, "Oh, your Jesus said that all men are created equal," and like not that is not valid and not true here
Mm-hmm.
in the case of Rome. And that felt like such an intentional choice of words to come from that character specifically. And because so much of our roots and kind of the ethos and the narrative we told ourselves as Americans is so centered around that specific phrasing too. that it just felt so powerful and intentional, and it coming from this kind of like Roman leader of this specific area. Man, I just thought that that really hit home too.
And there are so many really smart lines in this. So many. And there are some like that are an indictment of America. I think that there's some really interesting like biblical parallels. So like when he says, or when he frees all the slaves and then he says, "Don't tell them my name." That's something that the Bible says that
Yeah.
Jesus did a lot. So I was like, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, you also know your Bible, which is great, especially when you're making a biblical epic. Like,
Yeah.
that's helpful. But then there's also like really funny parts that are just so silly. So like he when Clarence is professing his love, he says, "I'm spirit over sandals in love with you." So it's all of these like really smart, really funny lines. Like it's just so well written. I'm so impressed with this movie. It really hits all the boxes, and it's it's so much fun. It's so witty and funny, but also while you're laughing, it'll make you think about, like we've been saying, these really important topics for where we are as Americans and things that we, I feel like, need to grapple with. And this movie is just inviting us to come on in and think more deeply.
Yeah, yeah. I love when that happens, when you finish laughing, right? You know, at the tail end, your laughter's kind of calmed down. You're like, oh wow, actually, like, oh my,
Mhm.
that
Yep.
like the initial delight from the joke kind of falls into your lap, and you're like, oh, this is why it's funny. Oh my goodness. In the best way, like, oh, there's so much there that my delight is just but the surface of that point, that larger thing, and like then you're down that whole rabbit hole, and the movie keeps going, and you just want to dwell in that moment, but the moment's over, and then you got to collect all of those things, those moments after the movie's ended, into your little bucket so that you can think about them later. Those are some of the best moments, man. um,
Hmm.
so good. uh, One of the moments that I think is like top 10 so far of most memorable theater moments that I've had in my lifetime. It's the Jedediah the Terrible, and he has that speech around basically insecure men are the ones that are
Hmm.
often most, uh, you know, gravitating towards oppression, and it's the source of their feeling of lack. That whole fabulously written kind of monologue that he gives. And there is a woman in my theater, probably like third row of the theater, and she audibly is like, "Let's go, come on!" Like just it
Yes.
filling her so fully and resonating so fully that it was just, it gave me chills. I was like, this is the power of art, to feel so seen and to feel so excited by something that you just can't hold it in. And I was like, man, that's going to be one of the most memorable like movie going experiences. I mean, we talk about the way movies resonate with us and spoke to us all the time on this podcast, but to see that like overflowing of emotion live in someone else too in the theater was just so exciting. So that was incredible. That was really incredible testament to this movie.
Oh, I love that. And honestly, that speech deserved it. That speech was so good.
It was fabulous. It was fabulous. Yeah. Okay, other things that we wanted to talk about this movie.
Can we just shout out Lakeith Stanfield? Uh, he's great in this. And what I really loved is that we get to see him playing two different roles. Uh, him as Thomas's twin brother. Uh, and I loved how different they were. And he was able to give both of them these really well rounded, full performances. And both of them go through character arcs. Obviously, Clarence's is much bigger, but we get to see growth and change in both of them. And Lakeith does so well in the fun, lighthearted, raucous moments, but then he's also so great in those really, really hard moments too. And it's just nice to see him in a leading role like this, where he's able to fully showcase his range, because it is quite impressive, and he does a great job carrying this movie.
Range is the perfect word to use in what he's able to display in this. I mean, so accurate. He does really understated, subtle, like deep emotional stuff through the character of Thomas. And he doesn't get a lot of like big moments, but the ones that he does, just the way Lakeith can emote with his eyes is absolutely magical. But then he can do the like big, wild, hilarious stuff with him and the character Elijah as well. I mean, the man is doing everything. I mean, the amount of times in this movie, I was like, why is he so good? Just
Mhm.
he's bringing it. What is also fascinating too is Lakeith as an actor, I feel like has chosen such intentional roles as well, and the types of characters and the movies and creators that he chooses to work with are so carefully chosen, and so each one is so powerful that I really appreciate just kind of his from a career perspective, the way that he thinks about the choices and roles he takes on and where he invests his time on projects. I just am kind of in awe of that as well. They all feel so meaningful and personal to him, and are carrying forward a message and a type of art that is boundary breaking in so many of his choices. So I'm really always keen to see like what he's in, because they feel very intentionally chosen.
Yeah. And I don't know. I love Wes Anderson. I will bring this back to this movie, I promise. And I one of the things that I love about Wes Anderson is that he
Uh-huh.
has created this little like family of people, and he has his friends who are in all of his movies, or almost all of his movies. And so I would really love it if James Samuel can do something similar and just have Lakeith in all of his movies. And that would be lovely. So that is my request, that uh I don't know, we just see more opportunities for these two who are so good at their respective crafts and are very good when paired together, just able to make more boundary breaking, thoughtful, insightful movies like this. That would be great.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Yeah, let's see this one chart its course over many, many decades, please. Just continuing to make
Right?
new things. One of those like director actor partnerships that is just there's something going on there, some chemistry, some magic that sparks between them, and they just keep putting out good stuff. We've seen a few gems like that in some of the directors of today. Yeah, I love it. I'm here for
Hmm.
it too.
Yeah. I don't know if they're friends, but in my mind, I would love it if they were friends and then just had a great time making movies together, because that would be
Yep.
lovely.
I love it. Um, cool. Other, what were some other themes that really stood out to you, or other aspects of this movie that you wanted to hit on? Cool.
Yeah, I think something really interesting that this movie does is that contrast between Thomas and Clarence, I think is super interesting, because they're twins, raised in the same house, raised by the same mom. Um, and yet they find themselves in such different places in life. And I feel like the character of Thomas is such an indictment on some of the ways that like we walk out faith, whatever that faith may look like, and the way that it's so easy to get so wrapped up in this new belief, or get so close to this like new group of people, that we forget others, and we forget, the like loving other people portion, just to focus on the loving the people that we hang out with and are friends with. So I think Thomas provides a really important contrast for us to just examine like how we live and how we do relationships with other people, especially if those people believe something different than us. And so I thought that that was such an insightful character to include, not just from like a story perspective, but also as a yet another opportunity to reflect and think more deeply.
Oh, that's so good, and I think that you see that Thomas has an arc too over the course of this film as well. You know, and him beginning to see the ways that he has maybe been blinded and been, just so wrapped up in this new world and this life and this community that he's taken a part in, that he's also uh, forgotten aspects of his past and his family and his community that he's come from. And you see that he begins that process of reconciliation and coming back to and reestablishing some of those relationships by the end of the film. So, Thomas isn't in this movie as a lot. He doesn't get a ton of screen time, but like even he has a whole arc as well that I think is really, really quite fascinating as well. And the other thing that I think is interesting about that foil between the two of them is um, how much Thomas is almost a stickler for like beliefs and truth that he's been taught, and like kind of buys into them without maybe questioning them fully. Like the amount of times that in conversations Thomas will say like, but like this is true, and like you're not following the rules, you're not doing it right. And Clarence, on the other hand, is just to hell with the rules and the boundaries. Like, let's do what's efficient, what is outcome and results driven. And you see his journey as well with him beginning to recognize that there's bigger forces at play, and purposes that he cares deeply about, beyond the like momentary gains that he's looking for. So that whole scene where he chooses to free the gladiator slaves, I thought was like really powerful, and showing Clarence's emotional journey that he goes on as well. But that foil between kind of their willingness to buy into systems and rules and to not question them, and they are kind of on two opposite sides of that spectrum, and find themselves by the end of the movie seeing the nuances in their approaches and coming a little bit closer to a more balanced uh, view of both of them, I thought was really meaningful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's so good. And I think we see both of these characters too, grappling with their own selfishness and pride, and seeing how both of these two go about that in very different ways. And so I think, like you mentioned, that moment when Clarence frees the slaves is such a powerful moment, because up until that point, he had been essentially looking out for himself. He's doing all this so that he can pay off Jedediah, and that was it. And he didn't really have a plan after that. It was just get the money to save yourself. The end. And then as he's going on this journey, he actually realizes that there's a lot more to life, and there's a lot more that he could be doing. And so it's really fascinating that Clarence starts out really selfish and like uh exploiting people's faith in order to make money to serve himself, but then he gets to a point where he's like, wait, I can't do this anymore. I need to use this for the good of everyone. I need to use this to actually create liberation for these men. And so I loved that scene. I thought it was so powerful, and it's such a good uh start of a tonal shift in this, cuz I feel like up until that point it really is fun and games, and then that like middle section is like fun and games plus seriousness, and then the last third is pretty much just seriousness. So that's such a good character moment, and such a good moment for the movie to shift and start to like lead us to where it's finally going to end.
Oh yeah, that's so good. That's so true. And I think that like that scene right after the chariot race, when uh, Clarence has that conversation with his mother, I think is so important to one, grounding this character for us emotionally, and bringing that connection with the audience around the emotional kind of motivations of this character. He talks about wanting to prove himself to be somebody because he feels like a nobody, and they don't have much, and they feel the lack just from a resource perspective of him wanting to be able to provide for his mother and to create safety and security for her. And so, like, everything that he does after that, even all of his exploitation and taking advantage of people in their faith, is grounded in this, like, very pure desire, which is just to be able to provide for the people that he cares about, and to, that like human desire to, like, believe that you are something better than just scum at the bottom of the earth, right? And the rules of empire is it's done through money, through resources, and through power. And then you see that he realizes that that's not the way to go, and that actually the the kingdom rules, and the way that the kingdom works when it comes to the messages of Jesus is around community, it's around love, it's around providing for your fellow man and not just for yourself, the giving away of everything that you have, that you gain everything. And I love that kind of dichotomy that you see of these systems of power and the ways that they too have pushed this messaging around earning your way through money, resources, power, and kind of the way that's flipped on its head, and the way that Clarence realizes, there's a different way to live that actually is far more purposeful and far more life-giving, not just for himself, but for everyone around him and his community that he cares about. Just that it's this, like, ethos shift that happens in him. But of course, before that, like, everyone that he sees around him, Jedediah the Terrible, he's earned his way through his riches and his power. Same thing with the Roman oppressors that he sees around him. That is the picture of earning your way to be somebody that he's been maybe taught or fed throughout his life. And you see the way that he kind of challenges that idea by the end of the movie. So I thought that was such a, like, insightful way to frame that root core desire within all of us to believe that we are worth something beyond just to be forgotten.
Mm-hmm. And how his mom sees that, and Elijah sees it, Berenia sees it, uh, but he doesn't see it at first, and he has bought into the lie, and it is kind of fascinating because he starts out as kind of this, like, rebellious kid. He's part of the system, but, like, not at the same time. Like, he's trying to not be, but doesn't really know how to, like, fully extricate himself out of that. And then you see by the end, he has found that subversive way to live. And then, of course, the oppressors don't like that, so it ends kind of badly for him. But it is interesting to think about how much those, like, man-made structures and systems are so present in this, and what Clarence has to do to really free himself from its clutches. I don't know, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the other kind of journeys that Clarence goes on that I found really compelling is this dichotomy that's kind of littered throughout the film around knowledge and belief. You know, his whole message to the people as the new Messiah, when they're doing that whole scheme, is around this, like, elevation of knowledge, and that knowledge ultimately is the most prized possession. It's the thing that you can anchor in. And he kind of scoffs at this idea of faith or belief or whatnot. And by the end of the movie, when Jesus comes to visit him in the tomb, I forget the exact wording of the last line, but it basically is this idea that, like, to know and to believe can coexist together. And I feel like it's such a re-examination of, like, the very Western Enlightenment ideal around, like, the pursuit of knowledge, and that knowledge is the thing that unlocks our ability to uncover truth. And we kind of see knowledge and belief somehow as two sides of a dichotomy, and that one cannot exist. One exists without the other. And I love that at the end, it's actually not even a rejection of one or the other. It's the fact that it's through the coexisting of these two things together that we find that is where we can anchor in. And it's very like philosophical like concept that I feel like James Samuel's woven so intentionally throughout this movie because we revisit this so many times. And Clarence's kind of elevation of knowledge. We see Thomas on the other side of the spectrum that's pure, like, no, you just got to have faith and believe. And by the end of the movie, we kind of land with the ability for both of these truths and these statements to exist at the same time together. And the movie ends with that. So I felt like that was such a insightful piece. I feel like I'm still mulling over that, but it really is this examination of this Western like upholding of the pursuit of like knowledge, scientific observation, like what's true is only what you can see, and kind of asks us to contend with that a little bit more and like grapple with that.
Yeah, I love how nuanced this film is. I think that's especially valuable given what like Western Christianity has been like for so long. I feel like so much of at least the church that like I grew up in and I was a part of was very black and white, and it was very much that like, yeah, we believe but we know and we are right and this is the way to follow Jesus, and like very like stuck in the rut, entrenched doctrine, faith, like all of that. And I love that this movie is like, yeah, cool, knowledge good, truth good, facts good, awesome, but there's also other stuff going on here. And I loved that nuanced perspective, and I think that that's so important, especially in like church culture and church conversations, to be able to have that space for the gray. And I feel like this movie in some ways is an exploration of that. And sometimes you will know certain things and sometimes you will believe certain things, and you can have both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And you can also see how things are shifting and changing over time, and that's okay. You can shift and change too. And so I don't know, I think anytime that nuance can be added to a conversation about faith, I think is usually helpful and usually pretty freeing. So again, I didn't expect all this to come from the Book of Clarence, but there's so much here to think so deeply on about many different facets of life, including faith and belief and how we live those things out.
It's crazy. It's so surprising because I think that like if you go into this movie, maybe if you watch the trailer or if you look at the premise, it's you don't expect it. Um I think and even from the first 20 minutes of the movie, you wouldn't expect there to be so much richness here. And I think what I also love about this movie, which is the case from for all great art, is that it invites you into these ideas, but it doesn't shove anything down your throat. There's not like a
Mm-hmm.
manifesto that it's looking
Yeah.
to impart to you. It's not buttoned up and structured and giving you its thesis. It's kind of asking you to just come and examine and uh invite you into the gray, like you mentioned, and let you figure out what you believe about somewhere in the gray. But the maybe its thesis is that there's a lot more beyond what we've been given and told as truth, as the narratives that we believe today, and like come and explore more is kind of the way that it is asking you to come and engage with it.
Mm-hmm. Which is a great invitation. Like, yes, let's explore more about the things that we
Yeah.
believe and not just limited to faith, you know. Let's explore the way that we've been taught around politics, about history, about all of these complex themes that are directly affecting our lives today. Let's just explore. Let's interrogate what we've always been taught, you know, and just see what new things can be learned, see what freedom can be found there. Because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, there's more than just what we've inherited. There's more than just what we've been taught. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that this movie is, like you said, it's just saying, hey, come on, this is fun, come and explore with us. It's great.
Yeah, you're so right. And to give it and package it with that idea of fun and to give it that kind of like the ability for it to be palatable and accessible for people, I think is so key because a whole population, I'm sure, is turned away if this is the like a dramatic retelling with some of these like changes made. It's like it's kind of like silly and hilarious, and you're laughing and having a good time, and along the way perhaps there's some ideas that have been uprooted, and you can replant them as you see fit. But I think that wrapping in humor and in comedy is vital for, I think, this to work as well as it does.
Yeah, especially when doing what this film is doing, you know, taking a biblical epic that has
Yeah,
historically
yeah,
been portrayed by white people and centered around white people, and kind of flipping it on its head. Like, you need to set out like right from the start to let us know that this is something different. You know, this movie is not trying to be biblically accurate, but it's using the biblical epic as a vehicle to get us to think about these different things. And I think starting off with humor is a great way to show like, hey, this is not, if you came in here expecting Ben-Hur, you are wrong. We got a
yeah,
different movie that's a lot more fun, so buckle in.
yeah, yeah. Well, it also, like traditionally, this genre has been so sensitive by the people that are watching and consuming it because of the amount of criticism that will come around
Mhm.
some detail that isn't
Yep.
accurate, or the way that this are portrayed lean too heavily into this, and that's not what actually happened. Not even just like historical accuracy, but even the spirit of some of these like stories that are so meaningful for people that believe in this faith tradition and believe things to be true. Like this can get real sensitive real fast. So like that's why I thought of Jojo Rabbit, because I was like, my goodness, the like willingness and audacity to tackle a subject matter like this and to do it in this way is something that is not for the faint of heart and is incredibly risky. And so I just really respect the willingness to go there and to play in that arena and to like uproot a bunch of things. Like, talk about the fastest way to like sink your career if you do this poorly, you know what I mean? And you just invite this slew of people that are
Yeah.
so upset with you because you've hit on something that is so near and dear to them. Whew, not for the faint of heart. So the like artistic audacity, I just applaud. I really do.
Yeah. And again, he nailed it. James
Yep.
Samuel and the entire crew, all of the cast, like nailed it. And that is not an easy thing to do. Like, you watch some movies and you're like, oh, that was good, that was well executed, but like the premise was safe, and so you're like, yeah, that was fine. But like this premise is not safe. He is tap dancing through a minefield with this
Yeah.
movie,
Yeah.
and it is exceptionally well done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Man, so good. So good. This shouldn't work as well as it does, but it really does.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Man. Okay, any other last thoughts about the Book of Clarence before we wrap up?
Jen, did you notice any pinky rings in this movie?
Whenever you ask me this question, I'm like, let me replay this movie because I did not notice any single pinky ring, but I can guess. I'm great at guessing.
Yeah,
I'm sure Pontius Pilate had maybe
he
something in there. Maybe?
he didn't. I At least not that I
Okay,
saw. I don't know.
that.
I know.
What
I was like,
about
that was a
the
miss.
Roman soldiers? I'm sure the Roman soldiers. I mean, they love to just like deck themselves out with shiny things.
I didn't spot any on the Roman soldiers. And
Okay.
my hypothesis for that is they were in uniform, so like maybe that wasn't part of the uniform.
Mm, yeah. Okay,
Because
my
like
next
if
guess.
anybody's gonna have one, it's gonna be Pontius Pilate and the Roman soldiers, but they
That's what I'm
didn't. At least not
saying.
that I saw. I might have missed one. I don't know.
Okay. My next guess is Jedediah the Terrible.
You nailed it.
Specifically in the scene where they like enter into his lair.
Yes. Yep,
Really?
he is wearing one there. Yes.
Wonderful. That is a great moment too, because that scene, he is still, give me my money mode.
Hmm.
I don't care about you. I care about my money so that I can
Yep.
continue to pay the mortgage on my lair. It was a
Yeah.
very involved lair. There were like multiple layers
Yeah.
to get to the
I
big boss at
I
the
was
end in the middle.
impressed. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're going to do a layer, that's how you do it. Take some
Mm-hmm.
notes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. A lot going on. You got to go through at
Hmm.
least like 7 different rooms to like
Yeah.
basically get to the middle of the
Yeah.
entire conclave.
It's brilliant.
Oh,
It's how you
so
do it.
good. Wow. Are there any other pinky rings?
Yes. So,
Okay, I have no more guesses.
Clarence wears one for a portion of the film. So
Which part?
at the beginning, he is not wearing one.
Mm.
And then once he starts getting famous and getting money from exploiting the people's faith, he starts wearing a pinky ring.
Oh,
But
wow.
by the end of the movie, like when he does the walk on water scene, he is no longer wearing a pinky ring. And I thought
Mm.
that that was really fascinating. Uh, because I don't know, I feel like that lines up with my hypothesis of when a
It
dude
lines up.
wears a pinky ring, he's a bad guy
Yes.
because he takes it off
Well,
when he becomes good again.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say is that like these are better data points than even just the ones that are just pure evil from start to finish, because the timing of said pinky ring is perfectly aligned with
Mhm.
their evil tendency periods. you know?
Yes.
And the minute that they become good and good begins to win, they just look at their hands and they're like, I don't need
I
this shiny
must
thing
take
on my
this
pinky
off.
anymore. Yes, this is a thing of my very ugly side, and we don't need that anymore. So I feel like these data points are particularly good for the hypothesis.
Hmm. Yep. And I think, I don't know,
Wow.
maybe the hypothesis needs continued like refinement, because I think it's also usually like wealthy men who have like gained their money from shady means is usually like
Oh,
what it is, like it's a status of a certain level of wealth or power that a man will usually wear a pinky ring in a movie. So I don't know.
okay.
We're still refining. So like bad guy might be like too general, though I do think that the hypothesis still lines up with that. But I think it's even maybe a subset of that.
Wow. The hypothesis is narrowing. That's some exciting stuff. We can
Which
test this more.
honestly is so much fun because we know that like it's hit or miss with women. So it's usually
Yes.
straight white dudes who, if they're wearing a pinky ring, they're a bad guy in a movie. Like usually that
Yes.
is the subset. But I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit deeper than that. So we
Mm,
will continue to refine
I like it.
this
Okay.
very important mission that we're on.
I had a thought editing our last episode because we talked about pinky rings in that one too. It was like just sitting there editing and listening to that section. I'm like, I'm so surprised. This thesis is very good. The amount of data points that have been gathered is kind of appalling. Because, when we talk about them, I'm like, oh, what a funny new data point. No, but like I zoomed out for a hot second and I was like, there's so many data points that support this thesis. It's
Yeah.
kind of wild to me. I think we're really
Yes.
onto something.
There are a lot. And I think that's
Crazy.
why I developed the hypothesis in the first place, because I would notice it and I'd be like, oh, he's wearing a pinky ring, he's a bad guy. And then the movie would reveal that Pinky Ring Man is a bad guy. And I went, oh, well, that's easy. That really helps, especially if you're watching like a murder mystery and a dude has a pinky ring. It's like, oh, he's the
Um,
killer. Easy. Got it.
mm,
Next. Like,
mhm. These are your
so
like detective
mhm.
brain cells that were sewed in deep when you were a young child watching. I forget what the name of that show was.
Columbo, Murder She Wrote, Diagnosis Murder, Matlock, like all of the like old school detective shows
All of
were
them.
my
Yes.
jam. Oh,
Yes.
loved them.
The eye has been trained quite well.
It's true. I look for the little details that are going to solve the case.
You're
And
like,
even if
what
I'm
could
not
this
watching a
possibly
mystery,
be?
gotta look out for something.
Oh, I love it. All right, well, this was our review and discussion of the Book of Clarence. You can find it available out in theaters, and we highly recommend checking out this movie. It's very, very good. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about the Book of Clarence. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at moviesanduspod, or email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film Anatomy of a Fall. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.